when you're going through the hardest times, that's when you need to be the most intentional about what you're metabolizing when it comes to wisdom.
I got to look at my relationships. I have to look at my well-being. I have to look at my creativity. And then I also have to look at like, where can I find meaning in adversity? Where can I find that resilience?
You could be exceptionally knowledgeable about a particular thing, but the fact that you have a particular knowledge on that thing doesn't necessarily give you the collateral benefit that wisdom does.
Welcome to Commune. We are on a mission to inspire, heal, and bring the world closer together.
Yeah, I think the teeter-totter between extroversion and introversion is an interesting one. And I think they're both necessary for a full life. The teeter-totter between extroversion and introversion is an interesting one. And I think they're both necessary for a full life. I mean, there's a lot of debate within the philosophical community of the contemplative thinker versus the active thinker. There was the philosopher or political theorist, Hannah Arendt. She actually specifically chose not to be called a philosopher because she believed that that was too disengaged from society, that a philosopher was constantly on a walkabout and not actually engaged in making a difference in society. So I find that, yeah.
Let me riff on that for a second. I'm sorry to interrupt, because one of the people who's become a good friend of mine in the last year, because I've moved part-time to Santa Fe, New Mexico, which we'll talk about, is Richard Rohr. Now, he created the Center for Action and Contemplation, CAC. So exactly what you're talking about, this balance, this alchemy. I actually think wisdom is about learning alchemy. Curiosity and wisdom, gravitas and levity. How do you introversion, extroversion? I think over the course of your life, action and contemplation, how do you alchemize these opposites, both of which have an important role at the right time and in the right place?
Yes. In fact, that is the center of Confucianism in some ways, is to find order out of the madness of the polemic of yin and yang. And it's funny, I've been listening to a lot of Alan Watts lately, and this is potentially a good segue into the role of the elder in society. And so, Confucianism was very geared towards those engaged in society. It had a lot of kind of formality and ritual to the warrior class and merchants and the serf or servant class of how people should interact within an ordered society. And then Taoism came along, and Taoism in a way was meant for the elders, for those who had become disentangled with dull care, with the vicissitudes of society, and personified by the ultimate elder, Lao Tzu, right? The creator of the Tao. And there was a fable about Lao Tzu that he was born old, and that he was actually born with a very long white beard.
That's how they pulled him out of the womb.
Right. Now, this is probably apocryphal, but there is this notion of historically of the elder as this wrinkled and wizened fount of wisdom. So I wonder if you could spend a little bit of time talking about historically what has been the role of the elder in society, and then we can get into how that has changed.
Yeah, because I'm not a traditional elder. I'm a modern elder, I guess, based upon the moniker I was given at Airbnb. A wizened fount. That's what I want to be, a wizened fount when I grow up. So historically, the role of the elder was to be often through storytelling, be the keeper of what was valuable to a society. Now the value could be in land wisdom. As a farmer, understanding the farmer's almanac in your head before there was a farmer's almanac. How do the seasons come and go? What's the pattern recognition relative to how in the fall you can sort of get a sense of where the weather's going to go and what timing you'd want to harvest or plant. So much of it was spoken tradition, spoken usable information. Some of it was pattern recognition, because that's a lovely way to describe what wisdom is: the recognition of patterns, not just in weather, but also in people. But what happened is, as we moved from an agricultural society to an industrial society as a first step, many of the pieces of knowledge and wisdom that older people had were not as valuable in the marketplace or the workplace, in terms of, okay, well, this is a new machine. And there was also a brawn, there was a brawn and a brain piece to this. And when it comes to brawn and brain, often you don't think of elders in that way. Brain, quite frankly, the human brain gets better with age in a variety of ways, which I can go into if you want me to. We tend to think of the human brain getting worse with age because of dementia or lack of memory or things like that. But there's so many other ways where the human brain gets better with time. But brain and brawn was not how elders were seen. So in the industrial era, the elders started to become this, maybe, I don't know, this redundant asset in society. Then we had the Great Depression, and that's when Social Security came along. We said, okay, let's get these old people out of the workplace because we have 25% unemployment. Let's bring new people in, and let's put them out to pasture, and let's create retirement communities so that they can actually be out there. So we not only did we say they're no longer relevant, we said, let's create some age apartheid. Let's actually shutter them out to pasture so that they are just by themselves. And then we go to the technology era, and the technology era took us to a place where, you have digital natives and you have digital immigrants, and older people are digital immigrants and younger people are digital natives. And one step further about why we didn't need the elder. But the truth is that it was Peter Drucker who in 1959 said, the world is going to be ruled by knowledge workers in the future. And he was right. 7 of the 10 most valuable companies in the world today are technology companies. The ultimate knowledge worker is a tech worker. But I think where we are today, and the reason that I think the elder is making a comeback, is because what we need today is not knowledge workers. We have a lot of knowledge workers, and we all have all the world's knowledge in our little iPhone. But what we really desperately need today, 62 years after Peter Drucker coined the term knowledge worker, is we need wisdom workers. And wisdom workers are people who are in the workplace or come back into the workplace and work with young, brilliant technologists to help create products that serve society. And when I say serve society, it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a nonprofit. It could be a for-profit. But there's a huge opportunity here for intergenerational collaboration like we've never seen before.
Yeah. What is the average median age at some of these technology companies like Google and Facebook? And
28, Apple? 30. When I joined Airbnb, it was 26, and I was 52 at the time. So, do the math. I was twice the age of the average employee. So yes, there's a lot of brilliance there, and there's a lot of knowledge, and we are an accumulating knowledge society, but more and more we need to learn how to distill wisdom.
Yeah. I'd flagged this for a broader discussion, but almost seems applicable to talk now about the delineation between knowledge and wisdom. And I'm sure that's something that you have spent a good amount of time investing in. So can you riff on that a bit? Well,
Jimi Hendrix long ago said, knowledge speaks and wisdom listens. And that's I do love that. And who knew that Jimi Hendrix was such a philosopher? What it really means, what it speaks to is the idea is knowledge is center stage often. It means you're showing off. It's like who's the smartest person in the room. But also from a math perspective, knowledge from an equation perspective is a plus sign. It's something you accumulate over time.
Right.
So that you have so much knowledge. Wisdom, on the other hand, is a division equation. It is taking knowledge, taking experience, taking intuition, and distilling down to the essence of what is important. And so so wisdom in some ways is the opposite of knowledge. Knowledge is expansive. Wisdom is like, the square root of something. And why is that important? Well, in a world where we're just awash in knowledge and information and data, et cetera, being able to distill down what's essential it becomes more and more important. So when I joined Airbnb 9 years ago, within a month, the founders said to me, "We hired you for your knowledge, but what you really brought was your wisdom." And I was like, I don't know what the difference is. And that became some of my sojourn at Airbnb, is to learn the difference between knowledge and wisdom.
Yeah, and there's certainly elements that are concomitant between knowledge and wisdom. But it's interesting the way you phrase it. I hadn't thought about it exactly that way, but knowledge might be understanding something through their component parts, through an analysis of their component parts. And wisdom might be understanding the essence of something, which I think is interesting. I also feel that wisdom is more of a moral quality than knowledge. I think David Brooks talked about this a bit.
Yeah.
And it's almost like an acknowledgement of one's own deficiencies, where like a wise leader will surround him or herself by people that actually infill around those deficiencies. And I suppose that there is a acknowledgement of mistake and failure baked into this equation, where, failure begets experience, and experience can beget wisdom if you're willing to actually acknowledge the mistake and then modify. There is that famous phrase, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity. So there's something there.
So two thoughts on that. Number one is I think knowledge is local and wisdom is global. And what does that mean? It means, so knowledge is, you could be exceptionally knowledgeable about a particular thing, but the fact that you have a particular knowledge on that thing doesn't necessarily give you the collateral benefit that wisdom does. Wisdom is global because often wisdom speaks to your own ability to read your intuition and your own pattern recognition. And wisdom is, I don't know a wise person who's not also emotionally intelligent. Wisdom is about reading people and about understanding humanity. And there is the philosopher quality to it. And yes, a person who's wise is somebody who knows what they don't know and is willing to admit it. So when I joined Airbnb, I was called curious and wisdom. They said, you're a modern elder because you're as curious as you are wise. It's like, okay, I don't love the idea of modern elder. It sounds like modern elderly, but if I'm as curious as I am wise, yes, that is, I would buy into that. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say that you're reclaiming that word elder from elderly. And, when I hear the word elderly versus the more historical context of the role of the elder, I think obsolete, ossified, burdensome, I have a long list of adjectives that aren't particularly flattering.
I think, and let's be clear about one thing here, because this relates to that. Elder is a relative term. It means often that you're older, but not always older. You have some level of wisdom stature that is different than the people around you. In the case at Airbnb, I was 52, average age was 26. But when I was 28 years old, Jeff, I was 2 years into having started my boutique hotel company, Joie de Vivre. I was totally lost. We had the Loma Prieta earthquake in 1989. There were no guests in town. I had one hotel. It was empty for months. And I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? So one day I took a journal that a friend had given me that I had not used. And I wrote on the front of it my wisdom book. And my wisdom book was this thing I would use every weekend. So each weekend, back to your thought about, doing the same thing over and over again. Well, what I did is every weekend in my wisdom book, I would make a list of, 4 to 8 different things I had learned that week. Not my emotional experience with them. This is not a journal or a diary. What I would actually write down is, what did I learn that week? Like, for example, what's an example of that? When you have to present something to a team in work and there's somebody on the team who's going to be opposed to it, spend some time with them before the meeting to socialize it with them and maybe incorporate some of their thinking into it so that when you have the meeting, that person just doesn't become the critic. And so that's something that's sort of obvious for me at age 61, was not obvious for me at age 28. So I created a book of wisdom, and I now have 9 of those books, and I have been doing it for 33 years. And the idea of metabolizing wisdom, or metabolizing and digesting your experience so that you accelerate, you cultivate and you harvest your wisdom by being intentional about your lessons and your learning, is what wisdom is all about.
Wow. You have 9 of those books.
I do. I might even have one back here.
Obviously you've published a lot of wisdom. You've published 5 books, and I think there's another secret 6th book from the early days that we won't divulge. I think you wrote a book in grad school that I heard about once. But
yes.
So obviously you've incorporated some of what's in these 9 books into your published work, but have you ever thought about actually publishing this volume of wisdom?
No, it'd be like publishing, your diary. I don't know how many people would really want to read it. Although, some of what I've written over the years has made it into my books. Sure. No doubt about it. It's funny. So I'm an Abe Maslow nut, and I wrote a book called Peak: How Great Companies Get Their Mojo from Maslow that became successful. So I spent time when I was writing that book. Oh, there you go. You've got it right there.
I know, right?
Yeah, no, it's I love that book. I channeled that book. That was not me writing. It was me channeling Abe Maslow. But the thing that was interesting about that book was Abe Maslow's diaries for the last 10 years of his life were published, and there's only supposedly 100 copies of them. It's a 2-volume set, very thick. And so I went and read Abe Maslow's diaries of the last 10 years of his life, which really helped me to see what had not been published. And it really did help me to see, gosh, if Abe Maslow had lived beyond age 62, which is hard to believe that I'm only a year younger now than he was when he died, he would have written a blockbuster around how to apply Maslow's hierarchy of needs to organizations or the workplace. He actually did write something called You Psyche and Management, which sold 3,000 copies, and it was very archaic. But he would have taken it a lot further. So yes, how do you metabolize these things? And yeah, no one wants to read my diary, and nobody wants to read, frankly, all of that content. What they want to read is the distillation of that content.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's go back in time a little bit to when you had started Joie de Vivre, and I'll tell you just a little story that just underscores how many points of intersection I have with you, whether you know about them or not. So I was in the music business. I managed, I had a management company. I was managing a whole roster of bands. One in particular, which was my brother's band called Soul Live, and they were in a soul jazz trio, an old school kind of organ trio. And they actually used a big Hammond B3, not a kind of new fangled keyboard. And this thing was, it weighed like 250 pounds or something. So it was just not practical at all, but we were just grinding it out in the Northeast. We were just week after week, we had residencies in Philly and Boston and New York, and I think Burlington. And every week we would run through these cities and lug this B3 around. But we were getting some real traction. And finally, we booked a West Coast tour. And the first time we were coming out to the West Coast. And I had a buddy, Eric Newsom, who is also a fellow manager, and he managed a band called Carl Denson, and another great kind of soul jam band. So we booked 2 nights at the Great American Music Hall. And this was a big achievement at this juncture because we had, I was the guy, passing out the flyers at the end of the night, booking the tour, booking the hotels, hauling the gear, all of it. I mean, we had, other crew too, but it wasn't, I wasn't in some ivory tower looking at a spreadsheet. So Eric, and this of course was this was maybe 2000 or 2001. And, Eric's like, well, if you're going to play at the Great American Music Hall, you got to stay at the Phoenix, at this Phoenix hotel.
Yes.
And I'm like, all right, I don't know. We've never been out there. This is our first tour. So we booked 2 nights at the Phoenix, and I remember, we finally got to San Francisco and we rolled up. And this is in the Tenderloin, not a particularly sterling neighborhood. And I was like, oh my God, what are we doing? Where are we staying? What's going on? And we pulled up to this motel. I mean, it was legit, looked like a motel. Yeah. But we came in and this place was so cool. I mean, it was so cool. The kind of entry vestibule area was kind of turned into this hip DJ area, and the pool was all kind of lit up, and it was this old motel style, but the rooms had been kind of zhuzhed up and were cool. And we must have stayed there a dozen times, maybe 2 dozen times. Mm-hmm. And of course, this was your first hotel, right?
Yeah, and it was really, I started in 1986, 87. So, the idea of converted motor lodges and motels was not as sort of prevalent as it is today. I was 26 years old. I was a couple years out of Stanford Business School. I was basically a businessman who wanted to be an artist when he grew up. And I had a commercial real estate background. And I was bored silly, and I said, boutique hotels were just getting off the ground, and as a new kind of hotel. And so, when you don't have a lot of money and you don't come from a family of money, you go out and buy a broken down pay by the hour motel that had hourly rates, and it was in bankruptcy and foreclosure in a bad neighborhood, and you make the best of it. And that's and the Phoenix, was the symbolic bird, mythological bird that rose from its own ashes. It's actually the city bird of San Francisco because of the earthquake and fire in 1906. And so, that was my first of 52 boutique hotels over the course of my 24 years of being CEO of Joie de Vivre.
Wow. 52 hotels. So I also remember staying quite a few times at the property in Japantown that was very near the Fillmore, because we moved up from the Great American Music Hall, which had a capacity of about 500 or 550 or something. And then the Fillmore, legendary, where Bill Graham had promoted so many shows, and that had a capacity of about 1,100. And we started doing 2 nights there. So we started staying, and I don't remember the name of the hotel.
The Kabuki. The Kabuki. Yes.
This was awesome. And it was kind of, the band really ended up hitting it in Japan. So we'd gone over to Japan.
You're big in Japan.
That's exactly right. So we'd gone over there about a dozen times, and the Kabuki Hotel was connected to this kind of underground mall that felt so
Japanese.
Japanese.
To be honest with you, it's not even underground, but it feels like it is. The garage is underground, but it's totally lacking in aesthetics. And yeah, the Kabuki Hot Springs or Kabuki Springs and Spa is there, the largest day spa and largest communal Japanese bath outside of the U.S., outside of Japan, which is a business I've owned for 25 years. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. And then just to kind of round it out, when I was starting Wanderlust, and obviously we share a common passion for festivals. Wanderlust, for the listeners who haven't heard me blather on about it in prior episodes, was a yoga festival that brought together a lot of different teachers across the broadest definition of well-being, and created what I might call the world's largest yoga retreat, for lack of a better definition. And but the new need friends. And in 2008, I was trying to get this concept off the ground of, we're going to make a festival of yoga. And it's also going to have music, and it also is going to have nature involved into it. And people were looking at me like cockeyed, like, what are you doing? What is it? What are you doing? And someone had given me your email. And I had heard about the legacy of Chip, and I was like, well, God, man, if there's anyone that would get this, given that you're on the board of Burning Man, of Esalen, of, these other kinds of entities and energies that had focused on fostering community around mindful living, Chip Conley would get it, So I sent you an email, and my expectations were, I don't know if I had any, but within a couple hours, you sent me an email back and you said, hey, I've got this property in San Francisco called the Vitale. And if you ever want to kind of do anything here to wire up your community, it's all yours. And I said, oh my God, that's incredible. And, a few months later, the very, very first Wanderlust event was on the roof of the Vitale Hotel.
Yes.
And what we did was, I followed your advice. I invited every single significant and insignificant yoga teacher in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I said, hey, come, and, we'll all just have a big community event on the roof of the Vitale. And 40, 50 people showed up, all teachers. And I got a moment to share the vision of what I wanted Wanderlust to become, which was kind of this bigger stage for teachers, that we could take the production savvy of Bonnaroo or Austin City Limits or Lollapalooza and, put teachers on a big stage where they belonged, with proper production and support and sound and lights. Now, in retrospect, I don't know if that was a great idea, but in the moment, it certainly felt good, and I think people really appreciated it. And the Vitale Hotel was the venue.
We had moved up in the world. Let's start by saying we had moved from the Tenderloin to the Embarcadero across the street from the Ferry Building on the Bay of San Francisco, and this was a luxury hotel as opposed to a rock and roll motel. And that was beautiful. What you were doing was simpatico with what the Vitale was. Vitale, meant vitality. And our premise with that boutique hotel was, there is a growing number of people who want to stay and feel vital. And they've outgrown the W, but they're not ready for the, Four Seasons or the Ritz-Carlton. And they're bourgeois bohemians, to use the David Brooks term. And there's a lot of bourgeois bohemians out there. And I think Wanderlust appealed to many of them.
Yeah, it did. And it does. And in a way, it was catching a wave and propelling a wave at the same time. And I would say that is very, very true of Joie de Vivre too, because before there was B Corp or this notion of conscious capitalism,
right,
there was what you were doing.
No,
so in what way was that instinctual, and what were some of the rallying cries and rituals that made Joie de Vivre a company with soul?
Well, first of all, when you call your sale when your company name is also your mission statement, you have done something that's quite unusual. And then when you have chosen a unpronounceable, unspellable French term that most people in the United States don't know what it means, joy of life, you're getting out there. You're sort of taking a risk. So creating joy became our anthem. It was our mantra. It was, for the 3,500 employees we ultimately had at our peak. It was the way that we created a magnet. It was also how we held ourselves accountable, with the idea that first you create a great culture, which makes your employees thrilled. And if your employees are thrilled, especially in the service industry, your customers are likely to be thrilled and happy. If they're happy, they're loyal. They spread the word. You grow market share, and you have a profitable and sustainable business, and then you invest back in the culture. So it's a virtuous circle. John Mackey from Whole Foods Markets and I talked about it a whole lot. He's the one who ultimately created a book called Conscious Capitalism and a movement around it. And so, my point of view was pretty simple, which is I want to be in the business to make people happy, create joy. I also want to be in the business of helping our employees feel like their work is almost like being in a workshop. It's almost like personal development is going to be synonymous with corporate development. And if we develop humans, and help self-actualize them, you're going to social actualize the company. You're going to make a big difference in the world. And that's what we did. And, I ultimately sold Joie de Vivre. And it's now JDV is now a Hyatt brand. But it was hard. It's very hard. There's something ephemeral. My first TED Talk in 2010 was about studying the Gross National Happiness Index in Bhutan, literally going to Bhutan, spending a week with the Gross National Happiness Index team and leaders, and then coming back and saying, okay, how do you measure happiness in companies and in society? And what's true of this in companies, it's really hard to measure soul. And often when you scale a company, scale and soul are mutually exclusive. And so that's why, frankly, after I sold Joie de Vivre, I was, there's a famous movie, the Intern with Robert De Niro and Anne Hathaway. And he says early in the movie, musicians don't retire, they quit when there's no more music left inside of them. So I knew I had music inside of me at age 50 or 52. I just wasn't sure who to share it with. And when Airbnb came along knocking on my door, I knew the first thing I wanted to look at is how do we build a company that can actually both scale and still have soul?
Yeah. So difficult because those notions do not seem to move in concert all of the time. I think it is easy to maintain a small, tidy business and with a lot of soul because, everybody's name, everybody's invested in the mission. Mission fluency is a lot easier with 20 people versus 2,000 or 20,000 people.
Yeah.
So,
and if you're doubling in size every year, within 3 or 4 years, you have a whole collection of people who don't know. They know the founder's story, they know the origin story, but they weren't living that. And there's you end up with way too much spine and not enough soul. And the spine is sort of like what holds it all together. But it's a spine is not sexy.
So we've also shared the emotional process of stepping away from businesses that we were highly identified with.
Yes.
So you stepping away and selling Joie de Vivre eventually. And I had the same experience with Wanderlust. And I will just speak from my own experience that there was a deep period of both mourning and growth in that order post Wanderlust for me, because I had a very difficult time separating my identity from what I did. And I suppose you might categorize this as a trap of the ego.
Yes, yes.
So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that process of of selling your business. And I think people can see this in their own life, no matter what they might be stepping away from. Like it could be a relationship, it could be, something that one has invested their time in.
Yeah.
And in your case, it was a business.
It could be a specific identity. It could be being a mother or a father and now empty nester. It could be being a caretaker and now your parents have passed away. It could be being a hero in archetypal ways across your life. So let's make sure people understand this is not just an entrepreneur's dilemma. This is one that affects all of us, and we'll talk about the Modern Elder Academy later. But that's one of the key things we do is help do the great midlife edit. What are the archetypes, mindsets, habits, and ways of being that we are ready to let go of in midlife or beyond? So for me, I had divine intervention. So I was going through a very difficult time in my life around age 47, frankly, about 46 to age 49, during the Great Recession. So it was right going into the Great Recession, and everything that could go wrong was going wrong. And not just with my business. My long-term relationship was ending. I have an African-American foster son who was going to prison wrongfully, ended up getting let out 8 months later out of San Quentin, but was a changed man as a result of it, unfortunately. Wow. I had one of my closest friends who has the same name I do, Chip Hankins, my insurance broker, took his own life. And he was one of 5 friends who died by suicide during 2008 to 2010. So all this was going on, and I was running out of cash to run Joie de Vivre. And long story short is I was really in a dark place. And then I broke my ankle playing baseball, and and then I got a bacterial infection in my leg, and then I was on a strong antibiotic, and I had a flatline experience. I died. So I was 47 years old. August 19th, 2008, was giving a speech in St. Louis on crutches and literally died 9 times over 90 minutes. Fortunately, I went unconscious first. The paramedic showed up. So the first time I went flatline, they could paddle me back to life. And I mean paddles on the heart, electric paddles. So I was in a place, Jeff, where 22 years into running that company at that point, I had this sense like I don't want to wake up every day and feel like this is the thing I have to do the rest of my life. I felt like I was in a straitjacket with this company that I'd created. And so I made a pact with myself, and actually was reading a book that night in the ICU and then in my own private hospital room. And it was Man's Search for Meaning. Viktor Frankl's famous book on concentration camp. And yeah, you got it right there. And I distilled down over the course of the 2 days I was in the hospital while they were doing all these tests on me. It turns out I had an allergic reaction to the antibiotic. That's what happened to me. But it turns out that I spent all this time reading about meaning and saying, okay, well, I think if I were to take this book, and I'd read it before, so I was skimming it. If I were to turn it into an equation or a mantra that I could remember, it was despair equals suffering minus meaning. Suffering being sort of ever present, and despair and meaning being the variables. So you have a constant, suffering, the variables, despair and meaning. And when I finally got that through my thick skull, I realized I need more meaning in my life. And it was in that process that I started to say, okay, how do I extricate myself from this identity that I have created here that is killing me? And it wasn't killing me, but the fact that I had a flatline experience meant I could sort of say, I could die tomorrow, and I don't want to say this is the last thing I did. So the next 2 years was the process of quite privately figuring out how to sell this company that was in a very difficult place because of the Great Recession. So it was that process that helped me to realize, wow, number one, midlife is a difficult period of time, my 5 friends who committed suicide were average age 48, a year older than me. Number 2 is learning how to extricate yourself from these identities is hard work. And it's not something that, society has done a very good job of helping people to understand. And midlife, the only thing we know about midlife is it has the worst brand in the world, because if you add a word to midlife, it's crisis. So all of that was note to self, but I also was ready, as I said, with that Robert De Niro quote, to go out and try something new and see where I could share my music, the music that was inside of me.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So many different threads to pull on there. So first of all, the notion of suffering and being a constant. Now, of course, this is, what the Buddha tells us in chapter 1 of Noble Truths.
That's right.
And in chapter 2, the craving, or trishna, literally thirst, is what fuels that suffering. But behind that there is a constant identification with that which is impermanent. So I am the CEO of Wanderlust. You are the CEO and founder of Joie de Vivre. You have this midlife crisis red Corvette. You have this fancy house. You have
trophy girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever. Yes.
Yeah. Just go, knock down the list. And obviously nirvana, release from suffering, quite literally to blow out, nir, and vana, is a letting go of that craving. And in a way, meaning emerges within that process. And really, chapter 4 of the Noble Truths is in some ways what one might call the Dharma, or the Eightfold Noble Path, which is the chopping wood and carrying water of life, that with the right understanding is the work. And, going back to Frankl, he claims that meaning is found in one of 3 places. It's found in community or relationship. It's found within work or your creativity. And it's found within suffering. And I would say that the latter is the most difficult
for sure
to find meaning in. So when you created that emotional equation, which later became a book of emotional equations, but that first one, despair equals suffering minus meaning, there is a lot to play with within there. And I wonder, as you've become to embody many of the qualities of the elder, of the modern elder, how do you think about all of those things, about despair, about suffering, and about meaning, such that equation can make the most sense? Because clearly where you want that equation to be is with despair as low as it possibly can be, right? And
yes.
Despair being the absence of hope. So how do you navigate that?
Well, the way I look at it is the following. So the first noble truth of Buddhism is suffering is ever present. So that's why I say suffering is a constant.
Right.
Some people would refute it, but I just say, it's there. It's out there. It's sort of what it means to be human. Partly because of another emotional equation: disappointment equals expectations minus reality. So, suffering is there. The beauty of this is to realize this seesaw of meaning and despair. And the place to put your attention in terms of those 2 variables is on the meaning. Because if you can increase the meaning, the despair goes down. So let's just do a math equation.
Right.
If 8 equals 10 minus 2, despair is 8, meaning is 2. And, so, okay, if I can add, meaning to 6, then despair goes down to 4. So there's that correlation. And the serenity prayer speaks to this. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the constant, the suffering, the courage to change the things I can, the meaning, and the wisdom to know the difference. It has wisdom in the serenity prayer. So wisdom is learning in life what is a constant, what is a variable, and point your attention to the variable. And, but many of us, and this language comes up in, Stephen Covey about your circle of influence. Well, it's that simple. It's a math equation, and focus your attention on the variable, because actually if you increase the meaning, it decreases the despair. And that's when I said, man, if it's that simple, why don't we do it? And it's not that simple. It's very hard. And yet that's what led me to writing 18 different emotional equations on a variety of different subjects, because I wanted to go out and research emotions, because most of us only learned our emotions from our parents, and they weren't very good teachers.
That's right. And this is straight out of Marcus Aurelius' Stoicism.
Yes.
In fact, in some ways, you mathematized, or you turned some of classic Stoic philosophy into math problems, which I found to be in some ways perfect for blockhead men like me who have trouble, finding vessels for their emotions, and math equations seemed like a good way to do that. But they do really simplify and clarify. So if you take that first equation, despair equals suffering minus meaning, and you obviously want to ratchet up the meaning. And so to decrease the despair. And if you can then focus in on what are the ways that I can do that? Well, I got to look at my relationships. I have to look at my well-being. I have to look at my creativity. And then I also have to look at where can I find meaning in adversity? Where can I find that resilience?
Back to my wisdom book. My wisdom book was helpful because it made me realize when bad stuff's happening to me, but I'm actually learning good stuff from the bad experiences, that gives me a sense that, okay, there's something good coming out of this, which helped me to have a sense of lessons and meaning. And so in many ways, that's what led me to making it through that Great Recession, is to say, I'm going back to my wisdom book again, because at that point, I probably was doing it once a month, not once a week. But it actually took me back, because, when you're going through the hardest times, that's when you need to be the most intentional about what you're metabolizing when it comes to wisdom.
Yes. So, and I will say, I have this one too, and I didn't have to go out and buy any of these prior to our interview.
Yeah.
I just have them as part of my life. And so I want to excavate another equation in the book, which was about happiness. So happiness equals wanting what you have divided by having what you want.
Yeah.
So
let's
unpack that one.
So I learned that in Bhutan. So, if another way to say this, so I love the language here. Wanting what you have is gratitude. To want what you have means I appreciate what I have. Gratitude. To have what you want is gratification, which is really the pursuit of happiness, which is really American society. American society is bottom heavy, and I'm not even going to unpack that one. But what I am going to say is we are so fixated with the gratification, so fixated with the pursuit, that often we lose track of the gratitude piece of it. And Bhutan helped me to see this. Bhutan helped me to see, wow, so much of that society is about gratitude. My favorite place on earth is Bali. They put out the morning offerings, that are just gorgeous, that are all about gratitude. And so then I came back from my Bhutan trip and did a little research to say, oh, okay, social scientists say that one of the most consistent ways to actually boost your sense of happiness is to accelerate your process not accelerate, but to deepen your process of feeling gratitude. So yeah, that one led to my TED Talk, and it led to me really looking much more deeply at my relationship with gratification, and yeah. So
yeah, well, there is a Stoic contemplation, I might even categorize it as a negative visualization that one can apply to wanting what you have. So, as you say, we live in a society of hungry ghosts, where we have these enormous stomachs with huge appetites and a mouth that's a little bit this big, and we're always trying to consume as much as we possibly can. And we have this, notion that, if only and only if I can get that thing out there, then I will be happy. So what that creates is always a chasm or a gap between what you have and what you want, right? And there is a Stoic meditation that seems kind of morose on the surface of it, but it's not morose at all, where you visualize losing something that is treasured.
Yes.
Like, my dad gave me this watch. It doesn't have to be a physical object, but my dad gave me a watch for graduating college so long ago. And, I think about, oh man, I've kept it. I've always treasured it. It's just a little token, an heirloom that I think about my dad. I don't think it even keeps time anymore. But, I imagine, okay, losing that and not having it. And then all of a sudden, I feel a sense of gratitude well up inside me for what I have. And it diminishes that gap between what I have and what I think I want to be happy.
So the way I describe that is, and I think this is a form of wisdom, is wisdom, it means that you are exceptional at creating anticipated regret. Now, regret is a very painful emotion, because if it's the regret of the thing that you wish you'd done that you didn't do and you can't do over again, that's lost. And that is more painful than having a regret of something you wish you hadn't done but you did do. So anticipated regret speaks to this idea of like, the question we ask here at the Modern Elder Academy often is this one, which is, what do you know now? Or what have you done now that you wish you had done or learned 10 years ago? Once you take that into your mind, then ask the following question. What 10 years from now will you regret if you don't learn it or do it now? And that is, again, saying anticipated regret of how I'll feel 10 years from now might help me to spur me into action today, whether it's to learn something or to do something. And so I would just say anticipated regret is a term that hasn't been used out there very much, but I truly think it's a form of wisdom, because it's a way for people to be futuristic enough about what their life's going to be like to help them take action today.
Yeah. Marcus Aurelius has a great quote. It's do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years. Death hangs over you. While you live, while it is in your power, be good or do the thing. So this is, I find that a lot of these equations, again, kind of rest on a foundation of Stoicism. Let's talk about one more, because this one I have applied assiduously to my life, only because I have a good deal of anxiety about particular things. So this one is about anxiety, and it is anxiety equals uncertainty times powerlessness.
Yes. Yeah, it's not plus, because actually if you have them both, it's combustible. And if you can actually reduce one of them close to zero, it actually could have a positive impact on the other. So 98% of anxiety, according to the anxiety experts of the world, 98% of it can actually be distilled down to either what you don't know, uncertainty, or what you can't influence, powerlessness. So the way to solve this one is to ask yourself, how could I become more knowledgeable about something? In the context of a company, for leaders in a company, hey, guess what? And you don't want an anxious company. So that means be more transparent. In fact, the more difficult the economic circumstances, the more transparent you ought to be, because it actually reduces the uncertainty. people often much prefer having bad news than no news, because they can ratchet how they are going to respond accordingly. And then the second piece is powerlessness. Help people to see it, whether it's in your own life or people you work with, help them to see what they can influence. So I do something called the anxiety balance sheet, which shows 4 columns. What is it that I do know? What is it that I don't know? And then what is it that I can influence? What is it I can't influence? And when people actually do the anxiety balance sheet, they often realize that there are many more things under what do I do know and what can I influence than you think. So sometimes making anxiety tangible is a part of this, because free-floating anxiety is a real term and a real condition, and it's often not founded or foundational to really what's happening.
Right, and this harkens back to the Niebuhr Serenity Prayer to some degree, and also the Stoicism's embrace of or acknowledgement of what one can and cannot control. Mm-hmm. I'll ground this particular equation in my own personal experience of how I've used it, and I've always credited you for this in a way that might not actually be great for your stature. So I'll tell you how. So, there was a period where I was doing a good amount of public speaking. And like plenty of other people, I have a good amount of anxiety about public speaking, though I also can acknowledge that I'm a decent public speaker. But that's maybe why I have anxiety about it, because I put pressure on myself to thrive in that environment. In any case, to reduce my anxiety around being on stage in front of a lot of people, I started in my rider, or I started to ask a lot of questions to reduce the amount of uncertainty. Like, how many people will there be? Will they be standing? Will they be sitting? Will I be sitting? Will I be standing? Will I be on a chair? Will I have a glass of water? Will it be bubbly? Will it be flat? Where is the exit? What's the temperature of the room? Will I have chicken or beef? Or can I get plant-based? Anyway, on and on and on, basically eliminating all of the things that I might be uncertain about and increasing what I might be certain about. And connected to this long list of questions that I would ask my promoter or presenter, I would say, you can thank Chip Conley for all of this extra work.
That's why I've never been hired by the people who they hire you, because they say, oh my God, this guy wants red M&Ms, not green M&Ms.
No, but there was a certain logic to it, and I have used it in ways that I found to be very beneficial. I will also say that, the human mind is just not conditioned to be uncertain. It doesn't like it. And there is some wisdom in becoming comfortable with a certain amount of uncertainty. Sure. And in my meditation practice, one witnesses emotions arise and subside as phenomena, moment to moment, and I didn't put it there per se. It just simply arose in my field of awareness. And, as one becomes a more accomplished meditator, as I know you are, one begins to be able to witness emotions without assigning any particular valence to them. That there is fear, there is jealousy, there is envy, there is love, there are guests invited or uninvited to my party, and they're leaving, just like Rumi says. And what I began to notice about anxiety is the physical sensation of anxiety is not that different than the physical sensation of excitement.
But it's deprived of breath.
Yes.
Sorry. That was the punchline, but I'm sorry.
No, that's great. And it has no valence on it. So, where I try to be with anxiety now is when I witness that sensation arising and it might be nausea, or it might be a tightening of the neck muscles, or some people get headaches. Everyone manifests these things physically in a different way. But to breathe, step back, assign no valence to it, and just almost the moment that you witness it, you can watch it float away. So anyways, but this equation has given me fodder for, as you can probably tell, much contemplation.
Well, I mean, last thought on this would be external and internal weather. So when we think that, frankly, that anxiety is never going away, it's like saying that rainstorm is never going to go away. I mean, our external weather and our internal weather are very similar. They're systems that come through us. And it's when we actually freak out thinking that it's never going to go away that we actually make it worse. I do love the Rumi, the Guest House poem. It pretty much says this in a very profound way.
Yeah, it does. It does. Okay. So you're on the other side of Joie de Vivre. You're on the other side of publishing a number of books, Emotional Equations being one of them. And you're in this liminal state. Mm. And then what?
Yeah, one of the things that's hard about midlife is you don't know whether it's going to get better or worse. Generally, the societal narrative says it's going to get worse after midlife. If you can survive your crisis, look forward to decrepitude, disease, and irrelevance. And so, there was a part of me that felt like I still have some wisdom. I still have some music I wanted to pass on. And I was lucky enough that the 3 young founders of Airbnb approached me in about 9 years ago, in early 2013. And they had this tech startup that was growing fast, but nobody in the company had an entrepreneurship or leadership background, nor anybody had any background in hospitality or travel, the industries that the company was disrupting. And so I was asked to come in to be Brian Chesky, the co-founder and CEO, asked me to come in and to be his mentor and to be the head of global hospitality and strategy. And it was supposed to be a part-time thing, and it was not part-time ever. But it was interesting because he did ultimately say, "Chip, you're our modern elder. You're as curious as you are wise." And that was after I'd been there for a little while. But it was a hard thing because I was reporting to a guy 21 years younger than me. I was mentoring him at the same time. I had to learn how to just say, "Oh, wow. My ego has been my operating system for my life up to this point." And I'm a big fan of Richard Rohr, as I mentioned earlier, as well as Carl Jung. Both of these guys have, in their own way, said that the operating system for the first half of your life is your ego. For the second half of your life, it's your soul. And it's in midlife that you are supposed to learn how to change your operating system. But we actually have no schools or tools or rites of passage or rituals for this. And instead, we have just people getting confused. And so I was put in a circumstance where I did have to right-size my ego. I was no longer the sage on the stage. I was the guide on the side. I was the person helping these 3 guys become great leaders and help their company. And it was a fascinating experience because I also had a lot of fear. I was like, I'm 52 years old in a tech company, and I don't understand the language they're using here. I've never worked in a tech company before. So long story short is, I turned my fear into curiosity and started mutually mentoring people, meaning that I was an intern as much as I was a mentor, and ultimately was a mentor to over 100 people in the Airbnb organization, but also helping to run many parts of the company. So it was a fascinating journey. I feel very proud of my time there. And the fact that the 3 founders are still very actively involved in running the company. And this is the only time in the history of companies that a company has grown to $120 billion value, where all three founders, 13 years into it, are still actively involved. And that was a lot of my role as well, was to help the three of them see how they have a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there are multiplicity of examples where kind of wonderkind founders have not made it for a variety of different reasons, but generally because they just don't have the experience. They don't have the wisdom. They might have
they don't have the modern elder.
EQ, right?
They don't have the modern elder. They don't. I mean, so Travis Kalanick, at Uber, could have used a modern elder. Adam Newman at WeWork could have used a modern elder. Elizabeth Holmes could have used a modern elder. The modern elder's there to not be the gray hair, to be the only wise one in the room. They're the one who's going to be interning publicly and mentoring privately. That's what I did. Interning publicly meant I didn't mind being the most curious person in the room and asking a lot of questions, because it's very Socratic.
Yeah. And there's a spiritual correlation to this as well. When you talk about U-turning, really, in midlife, because your whole life as a young person and as an adolescent and as a young adult is all about this notion of individuation. From the moment you're sort of expelled from the womb, and you become verbal and your eyes begin to focus, you're like, that's a tree, that's a book, that's my mom. And then slowly, like, that's a Republican, or that's someone of a different sexual orientation, or all. And inherent in all of that labeling, there's a CEO, whatever, is a labeling of oneself.
Of course.
And this is the process that we go through to convince ourselves that there is a self, that there is an individual, and that but the problem with this is that it underscores this story of separation, that we believe that we are separate individuals living in a separate external universe, separate from Chip, separate from nature, separate from the divine, God, spirit, however you want to describe it. And when we U-turn, we discover that notion of self, of a stable, reliable self, is an illusion, and that we are emerging within a holobiont of mutual interdependence at all times. And whether you want to think of like how one actually takes a breath and how that is even possible, to working within a family, to working within a country, to working within a company, you are always working within systems that are organized as a net, as Indra's net, if you're a Buddhist. And but not everyone gets to experience that U-turn where one eschews the ego and then actively becomes part of the net, and really almost toggles between self and take to community and give. and I wouldn't doubt that you would have been on that path, and you have been on that path, just given all of your curiosity and wisdom that you've had throughout your whole life. But it feels like this particular experience accelerated or helped to propel that process.
Sure. Well, the meaning of life is to find our gift. The purpose of life is to give it away. And so that the meaning is really fueled in the first half of life by finding your gift, finding your talent, through individuation, finding what's your essence and what differentiates you. And then the purpose comes from actually knowing, I've got that. Now, how do I share it? And I like, the language I like to use personally is moving from being a conduit kind of person to a conduit. And the conduit is being the channel, being in the business of sharing the gift, being in the business of forget about business, living a life that is full of gift giving. And so yes, what a shift for me, because I was a very ego-fed CEO for 24 years. So the process of doing that at Airbnb then led me to, deciding, okay, well, if I'm a modern elder. I'll write a book called Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder. And while I was writing that book down here in Baja, at a beach home I have on the beach, here I had a Baja aha. I had an epiphany. And the epiphany was, why is it that we have no schools or tools or rites of passage or rituals for people in midlife? And midlife defined broadly, 35 to 75, because there are people feeling in midlife earlier because, frankly, there's certain industries, especially if you're a software engineer, where you actually feel sort of irrelevant earlier, and then people are working and living longer. And so how do we help people to make sense of this period of life, and how do we help them to learn what I call long life learning, which is to live a life that's as deep and meaningful as it is long? Because we've gotten the quantity right. The quantity meaning, people are living longer in the world. Pandemic has certainly affected that. And so have diseases of death by despair in the U.S., which is a very U.S. phenomenon, quite frankly. But what we have not been giving as much attention to is that we've gotten the quantity, but not the quality. So how are we addressing quality of life for people 50 and older? And so that's been my thing for the last, half dozen years.
Yeah. And I want to go into that specifically in the Modern Elder Academy and what it is and what it teaches. I want first to ask you to just expound a tiny bit on because you list these, and I think that they're so potent, the 5 characteristics of the modern elder, because I think part of actually, the equation is almost acknowledging and realizing one's own value as an elder. So I wonder if you could talk maybe just about judgment and insight in this list that you've created.
Sure. These are the qualities that I think define a modern elder. And a modern elder, again, versus a traditional elder, is very wisdom flows in both directions. So it's not, the traditional elder was sort of a hierarchy and power rested with older people. Well, that's a world that still is true in the political realm, but not as true in a lot of other realms. So the 5 qualities are good judgment, often based upon pattern recognition from the past. Secondly is unvarnished insight, and I like the unvarnished piece of that. Insight is something, yes, you're able to distill down things. As we get older, the brain gets better at systemic thinking, and that is something that we are able to use to be more insightful. The unvarnished piece means that you don't sugarcoat it. You know how to be both direct and respectful at the same time. Thirdly is emotional intelligence. And this is definitely something that gets better with age. IQ doesn't, but EQ does. Fourthly is holistic thinking. Again, this some of that I talked about under insight, but some of it's actually thinking systems theory, being able to see the whole, being able to, connect the dots. And then finally is stewardship. And in many ways, that's the, sort of 7-generation thinking of Native Americans, and the idea that I am what survives me. And that's Erik Erikson, the developmental psychologist, who said that. David Brooks, quite famously in the New York Times, talks about eulogy versus resume values. So the idea of looking at our life as being a conduit, as being someone who's actually making the world a better place, is something that becomes heightened in one's, I think, the second half of one's adult life. It doesn't mean that Greta, who is going out there for climate change, isn't trying to make the world a better place. She absolutely is. But when you're in a stewardship phase of this part, it actually sometimes on a personal level it feels like you're there without all of the trauma and without all of the ego attached to it.
Yeah. Well, I have 3 teenage daughters. Well, one's 11, but she seems like a teenager. And what I will tell you about them is that they are interested in what they are going to get today. It is short-term profits. And I think, again, and of course I'm older, I have a few more tools, and I'm very much in my family thinking about what are they going to really get tomorrow and the day after and in 20 years and in 50 years? And how can I be a good family steward. And obviously then you can, use that metaphor widely, and apply it to nature and to other, systems that need sustainability. And I think, again, this is one of the things that an elder can bring to the equation within a business context is it's not always about short-term profits. It's not always about top line. It can also be about bottom line, about actually creating a healthy company that doesn't need to raise high velocity dollars every 6 months.
Yes.
So this is I think, again, I've had to learn that the hard way.
It's long-term thinking. I mean, wisdom is very much built on the long term on many levels. So
let's talk about Baja. And,
yes.
And I suppose New Mexico as well, but let's start with Baja because that's the foundation. And so what's going on?
Well, to be the conduit is really what I most aspire to today is how do I create a place that is focused on helping people to distill wisdom and helping them to reimagine and repurpose themselves. So just came up with the idea of the Modern Elder Academy about 4.5 years ago. We opened in January 2018. We've now had almost 2,000 people go through the program from 28 countries. We have 25 regional chapters around the world. So it's a movement. I mean, it really is a movement of people who are reimagining what it means to get older and reframing what aging means to them and maybe what it means to be an elder in modern society. There's a component of our program that's about regenerating the land, regenerating through farming and ranching techniques to help with the climate crisis, but also regenerating ourselves through our wellness and maybe even over time through regenerative medicine. It's about how to shift your mindset from a fixed to a growth mindset, which is a particularly important thing to do in midlife and beyond, because if you're constantly just trying to prove yourself and only play games that you can win, your life gets narrower and narrower. Your sandbox gets smaller because, quite frankly, you aren't willing to try things and become a beginner again. And then finally, it's all about transition. We somehow think that all of the transitions of our life happen when we're young, but we have so many transitions in midlife, whether it's being an empty nester, going through divorce, changing careers, having our parents pass away, having a health diagnosis, moving where you live, the evolving relationship with spirituality. There's a lot. And yet somehow we think of adolescence as the only liminal period for life stages because you're between childhood and adulthood. But there's a new word called middlescence. Middlescence is the period of time between adulthood and elderhood, and often a period of time when you're going through menopause or men are going through andropause. And so all of this is out there, and yet there are personal growth retreat centers that might do a workshop on occasion at Esalen or Omega on a topic like this, but there's no place that has a curriculum, a school, a set of teachers that actually are experts in this particular set of topics. And that's what we're doing. And it's been so successful with the first location here, an hour north of Cabo San Lucas in southern Baja, that we bought a 2,600 acre ranch outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico, to have our next location there, as well as have regenerative residential communities in both locations.
You're being Chip again.
Yeah, being Chip means damn Chip. You go out and do things, and why don't you just slow down? It's like, I do slow down.
But you have the uncanny ability to both be a visionary and to manifest. So
thank you.
That's that elixir of skills is difficult. I mean, oftentimes people have a lot of ideas, but they can't operate. Or there are good operators, but they're not particularly creative. Yeah. But to have both is unique, and you're leveraging those skills. And, I know that we both have a very good mutual friend in Paul Hawken. Mm-hmm. And, you get all sorts of just world-renowned and high-caliber folks to come down and teach as part of the Modern Elder Academy faculty, extended faculty. I know
Yeah.
Paul's coming down there in December, and I'll be down there to
Yeah.
visit. But Paul is obviously just put out a book called Regeneration, and he's 75, I think.
He is.
And he's been talking about reversing global warming for 40, 50 years. And now at 75, his work is more important than it ever was or ever has been. And I'll tell you something that was so moving, and I will endeavor not to get emotional about it here publicly, but I may, was, I asked Jasmine, his wife, I was like, so the book is coming out, and what's going on? Like, you must have so many responsibilities, and he's getting all this press, and he's charting on the New York Times and stuff like that. What is your role and responsibility in all of this? And she said, Paul has been at this wisdom for 50 years, and in the next 10 years, he's going to have more utility than he's ever had before to the world between the ages of 75 and 85.
Sure.
My only responsibility right now is to make sure he's well. And I was like, whoa.
Beautiful.
And it was beautiful. And, I think it also underscores really how crucial and integral that kind of wisdom is. So anyways, I just, I felt that emerge just now, knowing kind of what you're creating down there. And, both of us have been, focused on community for so long. I mean, at Wanderlust, we would bring all of these incredible teachers together, and we would put them on these mountaintops everywhere. And then we would go out and survey, and we would say, like, what was incredible? What was the best thing about Wanderlust? And it would be like the music, the yoga teachers, the location. Every time the survey would come back, it would always say community. It was always the community. And I know that you're building such to put that many people, over 2,000 people through that program in not a very long period of time is unbelievable.
Well, there's a term that comes from French sociologist Émile Durkheim, and it's collective effervescence. And when I was on the board of Burning Man and helping to craft where Burning Man was going, I loved this phrase because it really spoke to the idea of what can happen when you're with you are in a place with a common ethos, and your sense of ego separation starts to melt. And what comes in its place is this communal joy, this collective effervescence. And it can happen in a big, it could be at a Wanderlust festival. It could be where you feel that sense of community. It could happen at Burning Man. It could happen for 20 people in a cohort at the Modern Elder Academy. But finding ways to connect with collective effervescence is part of our declaration of interdependence. And I think we need more of that in the world.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked this interview from the Commune podcast, then I think you'll love this video right here.
Bad words, but there are no good words to describe somebody who is suffering something which does not exist, essentially because they're misunderstanding their psychological process as existential.